Welcome to Inside the Media, a show that looks at the business of the news and the people who make it. I'm Michael Depp, editor of TV News Check, and your host. Today, we're going to be talking about journalism schools and how good of a job they're doing preparing young reporters for a dramatically changed profession. We'll hear from two journalism professors and a recently graduated reporter about how they're adapting. We'll also be discussing changing generational expectations about what being a journalist means and the terms under which up-and-coming reporters are now willing to do the job. I'll also be talking with Julian Walker, a veteran New Brunswick journalist whose new memoir looks at the tensions of a career spent working in a media monopoly environment. We'll talk about where he sees a cautionary tale in the province's mixing of media and industry to a degree that he warns is far beyond normal. Stay with us for Inside the Media and get a closer look at the dynamics operating underneath the news. The profession of journalism has radically changed in the last decade with the flourishing of digital media. Today's reporter has had to adapt accordingly to survive, picking up a wide range of skill sets. Add to that the challenges of working remotely since the pandemic, which many have had to do. Then there's being the target of mistrust, cries of fake news, and even violence against reporters. It's not surprising that many are turning away from the profession. My first guests today are all very close to this issue. Terra Tailleur is an assistant professor of multimedia at University of King's College in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Philip Lee is a journalism professor at St. Thomas University in Fredericton, New Brunswick. And Nebal Snan is a recent journalism graduate and reporter on immigration and diversity at the Chronicle Herald newspaper in Halifax. Welcome to you all. Philip, the journalist job has evolved very dramatically in the past decade, and so has the media landscape that they work in. How good of a job have journalism schools been doing in terms of adapting and preparing students for this rapidly changing world?
I think that it's certainly been a challenge. I've been teaching for about 2 decades at St. Thomas, so we seem to be constantly updating, revising our curriculum to meet the changing landscape. So it's certainly a challenge for journalism educators. But I think journalism schools have adapted, and I also know that students are, in a sense, naturally adapting. There's no technological barriers there for them, and we're just emphasizing that they must be able to work in all kinds of media when they graduate, and they do. They're making documentaries, they're making podcasts, and at the foundation of it all, it's still good writing. So we emphasize all of that, and especially good writing and storytelling. So, I mean, there's some fundamental things that have not changed, and that would be, to be good storytellers and strong writers. But I think it's been a challenge for journalism schools for sure, to keep adapting to this landscape that seems to be in a constant revolution. So it's a challenge for ssure.
Terra, what are the skill sets you're emphasizing now that might not have been the case just a few years ago? What does every journalist need to know how to do as sort of a baseline for entering the profession?
Well, it's what it always has been, which is the basics of reporting, research, writing, being able to accurately and concisely convey ideas. Like, that hasn't changed. What has changed is often the speed at what we're requiring students to produce news at, the different platforms. So you're not just filing once to what might have been a newspaper. I know at our university, we got rid of our newspaper a few years ago. So we're all digital. So you'd be filing to a website, but you might also be doing an Instagram story. You might be live tweeting. You're really doing this, everything within a digital environment.
And you're learning how to version your content then for different platforms.
Yeah, absolutely. And thinking about it in terms of different audiences or different communities that you're trying to reach.
Philip, how many of your own students are taking a journalism degree and actually working in the field? Is that number diminishing?
It's held pretty steady because we've always had a situation where there's always a dedicated number of graduates who are very that are determined that they're going to work in the profession, and they do find jobs, and they find and have successful careers. And I don't think it's changed all that much that we've had students who have gone into communications type work or content creation work because they just don't really see themselves working in newsrooms. I do think that in at least this year, I'm noticing a change in the sense that they're starting to look at the profession in a way that it's maybe not all that friendly a landscape to be working in, and they're concerned about, I think, the amount of the fact that they're in a sense disrespected in the public debate. So they're thinking, am I going to is that what my career is going to look like, that I'm going to be vilified by the public? I'm going to be subject to online abuse when I do stories. So we've been talking about that regularly this year, and there's a real sense of, is this really what I wanted my life to look like? So I think there is a problem emerging now that as you said, with this idea of fake news and general distrust of this big umbrella that is called the mainstream media, that is I think that's a growing problem, and I think we need to address it. And I think we need to also speak out about why we need good journalists and talk about the kind of good work that they do. So I think we need to advocate for that in a way that we haven't had to in the past.
And Terra, what's been your experience with your students matriculating? Are they going into the profession or to adjacent professions?
Yeah, so anecdotally, I'd say that they're still going into journalism. They might be going into journalism part-time or temporarily. We are just in the process of launching a research project to actually track down where our graduates have ended up, right, within the last 10 years. So we'll have more data on that this year. But the wonderful thing about this is that they can apply a journalism degree in many different ways, right? So when I hear from graduates, they are either launching their own communications companies. Some people are doing this. They're not just going to companies and working for other people. They're choosing to go to independent, more small, like news startups, that kind of thing, instead of the big companies. Or they might just try on journalism for like a year and say, let's give it a go. And then they might say, as Philip's discovering, right? Like they'll look at, just find out what the hours are, what the pay is, and I want to try something else.
Right. Nebal, you're a new reporter to the Chronicle Herald, where I understand your reporting output includes both text stories and video content. Were you ready to do both?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you said, and as Terra and Philip said, there has been a focus on training students to be able to produce content on multiple platforms, not just text, for example, or radio or video. So that's a skill that I picked up at school. And when Saltwire, which owns the Chronicle Herald, decided to start a newscast, first few months I was there, I was able to quickly, seamlessly transition into producing video with the written content. So, and from my experience at school and the skills that I picked up, I also grew my skills, I guess, throughout the past 2 years.
Like a lot of professions, the early years of being a journalist are tough. You may have to live somewhere you don't want to. The hours are long and odd, and forget about holidays. And the pay and the benefits are not that great. Nebal, were you expecting all of that? Were you ready for it? And do you think that many of your peers were ready as well?
So I don't think any of this has been a secret. So from conversations with students and professors when I was at J School, it was obvious that this was a very competitive field to begin with, to get a job. And also, once you get a job, you might not be it might not be stable, it might be casual work, you might be expected to freelance for a long time, or as you said, the benefits might not reflect the hard work and the hours that you put in. So that's not really something that surprised me, but so my position is a little bit unique, working with the Chronicle Herald, because there is a union at the Chronicle Herald, and there are certain benefits that are provided to the reporters. So that's something that I'm not really hasn't been a concern for me in this job, but it's something that I'm very thankful for, because that's not the norm elsewhere.
In my own reporting, I've talked to a number of younger journalists who no longer find the terms of the profession acceptable, especially the targeting factor and the dangers that they face. Terra, have you experienced that dynamic among some of your students?
Yeah, so I'm the internship coordinator, so it's my job to place students in newsrooms. And increasingly, I'm hearing students are concerned about two things. So before, it used to be just the work aspect. They were asking questions about the duties that they would do, that type of thing. But increasingly, they're asking questions about the nature of the workplace, right? Like, will I be respected? Will I be protected? What hours am I going to be asked to work? Those kinds of questions, and they're not going to waste their time. So if there's an opportunity, even a job that might give them some stability for a few months.
Terra, do you agree that employers need to change their tact with regards to recruitment and retention, that they need to present a different work environment than they would have to do in the past?
Yeah, and I think some are. What I see particularly are the smaller independent startups like the Narwhal, you have National Observer, and Taproot and Halifax Examiner here, and they're all like saying, we want to create fellowships, we want to create opportunities to bring in new and emerging journalists, and we want to pay them. So that's something that, we didn't hear years ago, when everyone was like, send me your interns and we're going to make them work for a month or two and, have them do things that we don't already do and not mentor them and just basically use them for free labor.
Right, which makes the profession unattainable to people who don't have the means to do a free internship for X amount of months or years. Nebal, do younger journalists have a different attitude now about traditional media like TV, newspapers, and radio? Do they just see those media as antiquated?
So I don't think so. There's still some respect for traditional media to an extent. It's not, per se, I wouldn't say that it's the media itself that journalists are changing their attitudes towards, but it's, as you were saying and Terra was saying, Philip, it's more of the workplace and the working conditions that people are becoming more outspoken on. There has been, I'm sure there has been like an interest to maybe produce content for TikTok or Instagram or social media platforms. And independent, and as we were saying, independent media outlets have been emerging, and they have been seeing a lot of success. So there has been a shift towards that in comparison to working in traditional media. And so in that sense, there has been a change in attitude, but some people still dream about working in radio or working in TV. So I can't speak for everyone.
Well, Nebal, there is an upside to having journalists emerge now with more tools at their disposal, a new way of looking at the work that they do. For you personally, what gets you most excited about doing this job?
So what gets me excited, I believe, is what gets any journalist excited. It's being interested with people's stories, being interested with their lives, and then writing about that or producing a video about that and then releasing that to the world. And those people may be contacting you, thanking you for getting their story out there, or seeing little changes happening because of a story that I do. It's so those tools are a means towards the jobs that we have, which is to record history, to to shine the light on certain issues, on injustices. So those core things are what still gets me excited for my job, and not the shiny tools, I guess.
Philip, it's a volatile time for this profession. It's a tumultuous time. It's a dangerous time. Is there an upshot?
Well, when I hear a beautiful answer to the question, like I just heard there, it gives me a lot of hope, because that I do think that the profession certainly has intangible benefits that certainly go beyond conditions in any particular newsroom. That it's a exciting, wonderful profession, and we have lots of young people that are pursuing it for the right reasons. I feel like just in recent weeks, I'm just feeling like we need to get out there and defend the profession of journalism against these, the attacks against the profession are coming from we see them on the streets in Ottawa right now, and we also hear them coming from the left, who are using the same fake news expression. I was sat in on a panel last night where it was a attack from the other side of the political spectrum. So I do think that we need to say, journalism is essential for free society, and that there's journalists doing tremendous work out there. There's young people with this kind of commitment that want to get into the profession, and we need to protect them and champion them, and also champion the profession. And it's a noble profession, and it's so and it can be a wonderful life. I mean, the best days I had always were in newsrooms, and I've been out of newsrooms for a couple of decades, and I say I miss it all the time. So it can be a kind of there was a person's grand caper. It's a lot of fun, and it's a great and there's. But I think that we need to get back to talking about it in a way that it's. I think that we need to defend journalism and journalists and against these kinds of attacks, and we need more people that are doing that.
Terra, you've got the last word. How is the news business going to benefit from this period of upheaval and transformation?
Well, I think the students that we have now are demanding change, and the newsrooms and news companies, they have to react to this. So I'm very hopeful that we will see the kinds of change. I'm also very confident that this next generation of journalists is basically going to say, I'm just going to do it my way. And I'm going to control how, the news that I do and how I distribute it. So I think we're going to see a lot of changes that way. Very hopeful.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Terra Tailleur, Philip Lee, and Nebal Snan for the discussion. It is most certainly a revolutionary time for the profession of journalism itself. Thank you all. My next guest spent a 50-year career in New Brunswick journalism and public service. He was a reporter, editor, columnist, political aide, deputy minister, and journalism professor. Notably, that career included a period as the editor of the St. Croix Courier in St. Stephen, and as a columnist for the J.D. Irving-owned flagship paper in New Brunswick, the Telegraph Journal. Julian Walker now has a new book about those experiences, Wires Crossed, Memoir of a Citizen and Reporter in the Irving Press. Welcome, Julian.
Good afternoon.
Julian, your memoir is thoroughly entwined with the story of Brunswick News Incorporated, the J.D. Irving-owned publisher that has long owned New Brunswick's 3 major daily newspapers and a collection of weeklies across the province. Just recently, it was announced that Toronto-based Post Media is purchasing BNI, signifying the end of a very important era in New Brunswick media. Let's try to put some perspective on this. Just how expansive was the Irving media empire?
Well, of course, they owned at one point 5 dailies in New Brunswick, and that shrunk to 3 at one point. But significantly, after the year 2000, they bought up all remaining community and weekly papers in the province, except for my old paper, the St. Croix Courier. So at that point, they really had a grip on the entire media, pretty much, of the province. That also carried with it a lot of control over the politics of New Brunswick. I'll just give you one example of the interwiring of the two sides of the empire. Crosswires, I call it for my book. But in 2010, the government of New Brunswick announced that it was going to sell New Brunswick Power, our power utility, to Hydro-Quebec, the huge hydro-based utility of Quebec. And the very next day, before the print was even dry on the document, still a proposal at that point, but the very next day, the Telegraph Journal came out and called it the deal of the century. And this was all, as was evident in the politics of the day, this was all in aid of Irving industry to receive lower power rates. And it would have given them a 30% reduction in their power rates. So, I mean, that is just one example of the interweaving of our politics and media and industry. That my book included numerous other examples of crosswires. And so one reason why I'm rather pleased about the development that we just heard about last week is that the crosswires problem, the cross ownership between industry and media will no longer exist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's not a pure win for the free press.
So now the chain has a new owner in Post Media, a move that caught many people off guard. In what ways does this purchase reset the board for media in New Brunswick?
I have argued that it's not all negative. I'm pleased to get rid of that cross-ownership problem, which has plagued us now for full-on 75 years in New Brunswick, since Irving bought his first daily paper, the Telegraph Journal, in 1946. It's had a large effect on our politics, as I said, and I think getting rid of that cross-ownership problem is good. But Post Media doesn't have a pure reputation. Its major mandate isn't an independent and powerful free press. It's more to do with the almighty dollar. And they have a reputation for cutting staff when they get into a new area, and exerting a certain political control, supposedly more conservative leaning than at present. I don't think, though, that the doors are all closed because Post Media has taken over. I think if the federal government exerts its strength, its regulatory strength, and its ability possibly to create a new trust fund in the province that could back the English papers. We have a trust fund now that backs up the French daily, a fairly small daily in the province, which would never exist if it wasn't for that trust fund, frankly.
L'Acadie Nouvelle.
L'Acadie Nouvelle. So I've argued that something like that could be done on the English side as well. But there's other aspects that the federal government could step in and support. One idea, which I think has some merit and is used in the States, extensively in Maine, for instance, that people can donate to what is called main public television and radio, and receive a tax deduction for doing that.
It's a nonprofit model.
Yeah. And, not all the news would have to be of a public service nature, bland and mild. You could see those papers doing hard-hitting journalism too, but they would receive a little backing for the public service role, which they do supply to their communities. I welcomed my time in the community press. I think it's terribly important. And I think coming out of COVID, as an example, where we've had a problem in New Brunswick and possibly in the States as well, of people not talking to each other and understanding each other. Well, at the very grassroots level of the community press, people do talk to each other, and there may be a greater understanding of some of those difficult issues because journalism is on the ground in that case, and people will not just be talking in an echo chamber, if you like.
Well, Post Media is coming into the New Brunswick market in a climate that is pretty grim for local news everywhere. Even the Irvings had to shutter the storefront offices of their community papers, sent their reporters working from home since the pandemic. But perhaps we will see an infusion of resources, and perhaps there is reason for hope, or certainly change, as a new era in New Brunswick media begins. Once more, the book is Wires Crossed, and thanks to you, its author, Julian Walker, for being here.
Thanks, Michael. Appreciate it.
And that's all the time we have for Inside the Media. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.